Good evening, or good morning, wherever you might be. My name is Andrew Murtha, and I'm the George and Sadie Hyman Professor of China Studies at Johns Hopkins SAIS. I'm very excited to be able to kick off the SAIS China Global Research Center's inaugural workshop on the lost arts of China scholarship. Series is a response to the ongoing trend of restricting access to data and other opportunities for China scholars to do research on the ground in China. And this is meant to be a conversation about how we can and cannot use the tools and methods that were developed by scholars at a time when, and I know that this is a mixed metaphor, the idea of scholarly boots on the ground in China was little more than a pipe dream, in the hope that we can retrofit them to the current day. Tonight's program is roughly divided into three parts. The first 45 minutes or more will be given to comments from our speaker. The next section will consist of a brief, maybe a very brief discussion of some of the themes raised by the presentation. And the final 30 minutes will be a Q&A session involving questions from the audience. Please do send us your questions in the Zoom Q&A prompt as soon as you have them, that is throughout the program, so that we can launch into them as soon as possible during the final section. I am beyond delighted to introduce Professor Frederick Tevis, Emeritus Professor of Chinese Politics, University of Sydney, as our speaker tonight. Professor Tevis is one of the most important and influential scholars of elite politics over the past 5 decades. His ability to seamlessly blend the study of politics with a rich historical brush is unsurpassed. And his painstaking attention to detail puts the reader inside the leadership meetings, indeed occasionally at the very table at which Mao or other leaders were presiding. His ability to recreate the atmospherics while also maintaining the highest standards of scholarship is truly unique. Professor Tevis is the author of far too many books to exhaustively list here, but he is the author of the Magisterial Politics and Purges in China, 1979, and reprinted in a second edition in 1993. Politics at Mao's Court, 1990. Leadership, Legitimacy, and Conflict in China, 1984, and many, many others, tracing Chinese politics from 1949 up to the eve of reform and beyond. Over the past 3 of those decades, he has worked closely with Warren Sun on various works, including The End of the Maoist Era, 2007, and Paradoxes of Post-Mao World Reform, 2016. They are currently working on a study of the early post-Mao period, Hua Guofeng, Deng Xiaoping, and the dismantling of Maoism. For anyone seeking to understand elite politics during the Mao era and thereafter, Professor Tevis' entire catalog is essential reading. On a personal note, as a first semester graduate student, I became acquainted with Professor Tevis's Politics at Mao's Court and immediately fell under the spell of his extraordinary scholarship on elite politics in China. I've been assigning his work to my undergraduate, master's, and doctoral students since I first began teaching courses on Chinese politics. As I have moved toward more historical research, the care in Professor Tevis' approach to the subjects he studies and the standards he has set are constant reminders of how intoxicating the study of Chinese politics can be. And so without any further ado, let me pass the microphone over to Professor Tevis. Fred, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andy, for that very generous introduction. And thank you also for inviting me to participate in this challenging series, which will also include Joe Fewsmith and, and Alice Miller. I made clear to you when you first invited me to participate that I'm very focused on the book that you've just mentioned that Warren and I are working on the immediate early post-Mao years, and much of what I will say will reference those efforts, which I think lay out problems and possibilities for the study of elite politics in different periods, and which hopefully will be of interest. I do admit that my focus has been so intense that while I do look at what else is happening in China lately, lately in the decades after the early 1980s, my access to my attention to current developments in the Xi Jinping era are rather, how shall we say, passing, and I will much less than what Joe and Alice will provide, and I'm sure I will learn a great deal from them. Now, just to make one broad statement at the outset, which we can follow up in discussion, is my basic position is that not only is the kind of detailed attempts to get you at least close to the tables where these leaders are talking cannot be done, not only for Xi Jinping, but for the entire post-Tiananmen period. We can come back and discuss that in specifics. Now, let me start with a bit of personal history. In 1957, I turned up at Amherst College as a freshman. There were no courses on China. The, how shall we say, my own and the general attitude of the Amherst community was, you know, that like that famous New Yorker cartoon, looking out from Manhattan, there's California, exciting. And oh, there's, what's that place over there? Oh, that's China. Oh, okay, doesn't matter. Now, but if there was no course on China, there was a course that terrorized freshmen, both of that class and of the general period, which was called English 1-2. Now, what was English 1-2? It was each week the students would have to write 3 essays. The English department would give a theme, and you'd have to write on these themes and then get, how shall we say, often scathing comments from the different professors, because it was a small group, so there was one theme for the whole class. Now, there's one theme which is very relevant to what I'm talking about today, which said, we only see what we look for, we only look for what we know, which I think reveals some major problems in the China studies field of studying elite politics, and I'll come back to that. So let's fast forward 5 years, and I'm at Columbia. And I thought I was going to be studying international relations. But the way it was taught at Columbia in those days had so many models that had no relationship to the real world that I decided, let's look for something real. And so you look around, and there was a course on China. Oh, let's try that and see what that has to offer. Now, that course was taught by Doak Barnett, one of the leading scholars of this initial generation that started the study of the People's Republic. Now, Doak was an extraordinarily empirical and pragmatic scholar. He knew enough not to try much pakinology in those days, which was really impossible. The point I'm now going to make here with Doak, apart from my great admiration for him, is that he once said to me, studying China's politics is like mining. There's so much dross out there. You have to dig until occasionally you might find a piece of gold. So that is part of, and an ongoing part of the way of studying Chinese politics. Now, So let's get to that. We'll come back to what terrorized the Amherst freshmen later and talk about the mining process, the sources, and the methods of finding the information you need. Now, of course, what Doak was talking about was what we might call fossil fuels mining. Later, we got to what I would call rare earths mining. There were several developments. One was the Culture Revolution, which produced this outflow of Red Guard publications, publications of Mao's speeches, which overall presented a false message, but nevertheless presented enough information to really enliven one's understanding of what had gone before the Cultural Revolution. So as I get into this mining of rare earths, I think there are two things I have to say. First of all is that I have been blessed over the past 30 years in working with Warren's son, a collaboration of immense intensity. And if you want to talk about mining, there's nobody who has a larger pneumatic drill than Warren. He comes up with the most amazing array of stuff. Now, it's not just that Warren has a big drill and collects stuff. It's that Warren knows what to look for, which is not what we know. It is the problems, the uncertainties in the narratives that we have. And so it's that kind of focus that he brings to his mining, which is of enormous benefit to me, but also to himself because he's a wonderful analyst in his own right. Now, the second general thing I would say is that all of these sources form a mosaic. And the thing is, there are huge gaps in this mosaic. Andy generously spoke of making everything real and being at various tables and so forth. Well, I think there are some tables that we got to, but there are so many missing tables, missing conversations, that you then you have to not overstate what you are getting and avoid using the source that, oh, that looks good for what I want to say, but no, it's not sufficient. For whatever reason, it doesn't really stack up to the kind of academic standards that you want. So the study of Chinese elite politics in any period, even the best period, which is the 80s and really going on in the 90s, pre-Xi Jinping, can we put it that way, still has gaps, still has the unknowns, and you have to be careful. And you often have to say things, we have no evidence that, rather than, oh, Deng was in total charge of this or that or whatever. So let me just run through a list of sources that are available in this, or in the ideal case of these old, wonderful standards that this whole series is supposed to examine. And I'll just list a few and then talk about what I think are the most prominent rare earths that have been provided. Now, one is, and a framing thing is technology comes into play. The internet, the electronic databases. Of course, internet, there's a lot of rubbish in, and you have to know that's rubbish, and you have to have reasons why that's rubbish, and reasons why that's worth pursuing. So, as always, even pre-Cultural Revolution, the open media. What is being said? What happened at specific dates? What was the party line? What evidence is there of other currents? Documents, policy documents. They have appeared, throughout the history of the PRC, but now they are much more available. Archives, which includes many documents which are of great value that aren't accessible by other means. It's a question of getting into the archives and all that. There are also personnel materials. We have a lot of data on who filled which positions when. And if you look carefully at these, you accumulate not only specific information, but information which shows you that what is commonly believed is not accurate. And then there are foreign sources. I just mentioned one, which was tremendously valuable in this current book that Warren and I are writing, the Foreign Policy of the United States. Of course, this is the US focus, memos flowing back and forth. But MEMCOMs are records of the meetings of people like Deng Xiaoping and Hua Guofeng with Brzezinski and so forth and so on. Enormously insightful, and also we imagine that there's similar things going on the Chinese side, but we have such a limited amount of any corresponding things. There are other sets of documents from other countries which are highly useful. And then there are people who have interacted with Chinese leaders and write books where they refer to them and can say very insightful things or can say utter rubbish. Now, but let me go to the sensitive documents. One of the sources I think really began in the 1980s when there were dumps of internal documents. I think of Harvard in particular, where particularly with some people I could name dumping, but never mind, but lovingly curated by Fairbanks Center's noted, beloved librarian Nancy Hurst, some of them resulting in significant books like the Secret Speeches of Mao, which I don't think really were terribly sensitive, but quite revealing, with Rod McFarker, Tim Cheek, and Eugene Wu editing them. Then there are, and then it's not just Harvard, other libraries caught up. They sent their librarians and other operatives out there to get stuff. And you can find caches in various libraries in the US and abroad as well. There are some collections that are of particular use. I particularly mention Sung Young Lee's databases, particularly the Cultural Revolution one, which extends beyond the Cultural Revolution into the early Cultural Revolution period, which presents some really quite striking striking documents. And then there is, if you want, some more, how shall I put it, personally obtained documents, those that fell off the back of a truck, which can be quite remarkable, like the handwritten notes of various important officials. I think particularly significant is the bulletins of meetings. If you have a major work conference where you get what people are saying to each other or at individual group meetings within the larger conference. So we have that for the famous late 1978 pre-third plenum work conference. We have it for the following January, starting in January 79, the theory conference, and other conferences. And I might just mention one here, which is the internal meetings at the time of the sixth plenum in summer, June, July 1981. And so I'll give an example from that, how you can see really striking things which show things you never imagined, or you should have imagined but didn't. And so I'll just cite one. Now, Chun-Yun, in fact, we can get on to interviews in a minute, but one of the things which came out of interviews with Hua Guofeng's family is that Chun-Yun was tougher in treating him than Deng Xiaoping. And we can go into various reasons for that, but one of the reasons, I was quite sure, is that Chun thought that in 1977, when they were creating the Politburo for the 11th Congress, he was not excluded. He was excluded. He was not included. And he's even said to one of his colleagues, he didn't want me, he being Hua Guofeng. How did Chun-Yun know that? It wasn't the story. What happened was that the Hua leadership, Deng comes in, Deng is coming in, Deng is coming back, and I'll talk about that subsequently. And they consult him, who else should be in the Politburo? And they show him this list, and he says, no, it's too much. It's too much too soon. Now we can have all sorts of speculations as to why Deng did this and so forth. But now we fast forward to 1981. And so the whole question of Chun being excluded comes up. And Hua is being attacked, and all this. And he's, Hua does the ritual of admitting to mistakes, but stands up for himself. And he says, no, Chun Lao or whatever he called them. That's not what happened. This is what happened. Deng is sitting at the table. That does not contradict him. And Chun-Yun, who came to that meeting wanting to really pile, can I say, well, you know the word. Shit. And he now says, and now when they decide, when they vote to include Hua as a vice chairman after they've kicked him out of it, Chun's hand goes up. Okay, this is just a striking example of what you can get from these kinds of sources. Now, a second area of rare earths I would mention is party history materials. Now these have many forms. There are the really official stuff coming out of, if you want, the institutions of the center, like the biographies of leaders, the memoirs of leaders, the chronologies and the enpu of leaders. Oh, wonderful. See day by day. But then what you don't see, or titillating things like, oh, Deng meets with Hua, yeah, and so and so. That's it. He met with them. What the hell did they say? Was it this or was it, yeah, we can guess. But anyway, so you have that sort of thing. And of course, in those very official things, the idea is basically to put as positive a spin on the leader in case at issue. Yeah. But there's also another aspect of this. Beyond that spin, there's of course censorship. Now, this is particularly the point when we talk about memoirs. This is some bunch of party historians writing your life history, and whether they consult you or not. But anyway, and usually most of them are published after you're dead anyway. But memoirs, and I'll mention one, which is Gumu. One of the most important economic officials, particularly in the opening of China, who went to Europe in 1978 and played a key role in developing the whole notion of the opening to the outside world. Now, if you go to Gumu's memoirs and see his discussion of that, I forget what it was, 20 pages, 15 pages, whatever. Oh, dumb. Hua, I mean, there may have been some passing reference to Hua, but it was Hua who was, not that Deng didn't agree with it or thought it was great, but it was Hua who was the one who was moving that. And subsequently, in an interview, be precise here, it wasn't an interview with us, it was an interview with Chinese historians who get these retired leaders and want to find out what the hell really happened and talk to them. And so you get these interviews, and sometimes they fall off the back of a truck. So in this interview, Gumu says, come on, everything had to be credited to Deng, everything. And I have quotes here that I could run past you, but I'm not, this was in my even overly enthusiastic stage, so I'm cutting down a bit. There is that sort of thing. Now, of course, the constraints on party history apply to party historians. And so the articles they write in serious journals, and they can, some of them get books published in Hong Kong, which are serious books. They, of course, have restraints as to what they can, as to what they can say. But there is much of great interest, some things direct, many things just clues. And it's not just in journals in particular, it's not just party historians, but former officials. Obviously, there are agendas there to make clear what they, or more importantly, their leader was doing, and to put that person in a favorable light, but immensely informative of what was going on. So I think we just bring in the aforementioned Xi Jinping. He's gutted this kind of party history endeavor. The Yanhua Chungzhou, which was the leading, most at the edge party history journal, was in effect neutered in 2016. It still exists, but don't bother to look at it. The Gongshi Wang, one of the best collectors of materials, was disbanded also in 2016. So there is this severe curtailing of what this particular rare earth can give you. Now, let's talk about interviews. Now, broadly, there are two categories: party historians and people connected to leaders. They can be family members. They can be secretaries. They can be other assistants. And there's a bit of an overlap in that some party historians have close links to individual leaders, sometimes even, families grew up in the same bloody village or whatever, that sort of thing. So there's those two groups, and of course, in each case, there's the problems of I think particularly, of course, in the families and former associates, we owe something to our people, and there's that thing you have to look out for. But I will say of party historians, of course, you assess them one by one on what you think of the quality of their work. You note their personal quirks, but as a whole, I've been immensely impressed with the quality of these people. They're serious people. They believe in truth from facts, and they know when facts are not available to them, and they will tell you, we don't know. They will tell you, we don't know. So there has been enormous amount of information that has been secured from these sorts of contacts. I'd also say, particularly in a sense with the party historians, you develop friendships, and you develop moral commitments. Don't leave them hanging out to dry. In fact, I sometimes think, sort of because of their friendship to you, they take more risks than they should for their own benefit than what we would ask them to do. Now, again, going back to Mr. Xi, the same thing, which is we've talked about in party history journals, affects them in their activities. And they are people who are very well aware of red lines. And the red lines are sharper, clearer, and their productivity goes down. So doesn't mean they're not important people, that they have a high status, they can go and give lectures and get paid for that and throughout China, but there's not much, development further. Of course, they may know things that they haven't told you before, but they may not be willing, or they may be too willing. So that's what I would conclude with those three rare earths and the other ones, the other types of mining you could do, I will answer in discussion if people are interested. Sorry, I have papers here. I have to see where I am. Okay. So now let's get back to English 1-2 at Amherst College. So I'll start with a critique of the field, because I feel this period of the immediate postMao era has been broadly misunderstood in the existing literature. So let me just start with one aspect. If we want to go to the Amherst College essay, we only look for what we know. What do we know? Well, large part what the regime has told us. Now, what does the field seem to know? Well, how many times have you heard that Deng Xiaoping launched reform at the third plenum? Oh, well, getting beyond the fact that if you look at the communique of the third plenum, you don't find Gaigo Kaifang. In fact, you don't find it as the overriding tifa for the regime until 1984. The tifa was the four modernizations. Oh, well, if that's not enough, well, how about perceptions of some of the leaders during that work conference in 1978? So now on November 25th, Hua Guofeng gave a summation of what had been accomplished up to that point, which largely dealt with the reversal of verdicts on the various people who had been screwed in the Cultural Revolution. And this whole process was much more Hua's doing than Deng's doing. Hu Yaobang gets a big gold star for his role, and you can talk about the relationship between Hu and Hua and who should get more credit and blah. But after this meeting, there are other things that happened that day. Hu Yaobang comes home. So what does he say? Well, according to his son, Hu Deping, he says, Yaobang returned home and talked happily about his thoughts. He said, the pain and disaster suffered by the Chinese people has brought the entire nation to an awakening today. What is foresight? In fact, there is only one meaning, that is thinking ahead, taking action first. Facing a dam, Hua Guofeng made a breakthrough, actually a big breakthrough in the trend of history. Third plenum, Deng makes reform. In the process, defeating Hua in some power struggle. Hua, who's just a neo-Maoist or just a hopeless person, whatever. So this is the how should we say, shot across the bow of the field. Now, but maybe I am too. Maybe I should give some slack to the field. The reason I say that is the elite in China, in very significant cases, also did not understand what the hell was going on. And I'll cite three instances. First, the famous two whatevers itself. the two whatevers, well, there were actually several versions, but to simplify matters, the famous editorial, People's Daily editorial of February 7, 1977, in which I would first say people either in China then or in the foreign scholarly community now should read the goddamn editorial and see what it says. And what you see at the end is these two whatevers, do whatever Mao said, et cetera, tossed in. Now, and people in the elite looking at this, oh, this is to stop Deng Xiaoping from coming back. Even though some of the people involved, Zhu Jiamu, later he became Chen Yun's secretary, and after that became head of one of the leading party history institutions. He goes to Deng Lichun, who goes to Wang Jun. Eventually, they air their suspicions to Deng. What was the real situation? On January 6th, 1977, in the Politburo, Hua declares Deng is coming back. Deng is coming. The decision is made. Of course, we can talk about the timing and all that. But also at some point, Hua goes to see Deng, saying, not only you're coming back, Xiaoping Tongzhi, or whatever he called him, you will be consulted on every important issue. But still, to whatever's, which then later, for various reasons we can discuss, at another point in time became a stick which could be used to beat Guogofeng. But that's what it wasn't. Now, there could even be different understandings within the same family. So let's go back to the work conference and the third plenum in 1978. Now, one of the people attending, a minister of a significant ministry, Central Committee member, like Hu Yaobang, was very impressed with Hua. So impressed that he was contemplating proposing that Hua be named in the next party constitution. But he had a son, a princeling, if you want, who was working in the office of a major party figure. And he said, Dad, you don't understand what went down. Hua has not emerged stronger out of this work conference and plenum. We can go into what was involved there. But even, people deeply into politics, deeply into it, could have quite different views in the same family. Now, there's a third one. Well, I know what it is, even if I can't find it offhand. The third case is, okay, January 1980. Deng has essentially completed a very quiet coup against Hua. He may stick around as chairman notionally for another year and a half, but his actual status, functions, whatever, have just. Now, in January 1980, Harold Brown, Secretary of Defense, comes to China, and he sees Deng, he sees Hua, and so forth. Now, the actual content of the meetings with Deng and Hua aren't particularly different, but the atmosphere is different. different not only between the two on that occasion, but between the way leaders are treated by the other participants in meetings, whether it's Zhou Enlai, Mao, Deng, Hua previously. Those who are there are sitting on their chairs, focused. You know, we're dealing with power, you know. Now they're passing notes, looking at the ceiling. You know, the whole thing is, who is this guy? He's a loser. He's gone. Okay. These guys know that. So let's go forward another five months. May 1980, I think it's May, maybe it was June, I think it's May. Hua goes on a state visit to Japan. And he comes back. Now, both Dalian and Jiangsu hold great receptions. They roll out all the red carpets you can think of. They don't know Hua's situation. It's not that they were part of a Hua faction, it's that they just didn't know. So, if scholars in the Western world have not got it particularly correct, people in China, a very significant statist, didn't either. Now, I have really pushed the enthusiasm to a great deal, but I'm going to try to make some general comments on what we should be looking at in any period of Chinese studying elite politics, which is the point. The first one is contemplate, and this is what's behind all the misers and so forth. The leadership is.
For everybody who's tuning in, I think we've lost the signal to Professor Tevis. We're going to try to get it back. So I'll just ask everybody to please stay in your seats, and we will resume as soon as we get him back. So apologies for the impromptu intermission, but we will get it back as soon as we can.
Am I being heard?
Yes, you're back. You just to interrupt for a second. We lost you around the time that you were segueing into the general things that are the general kind of ideas, tools, kind of approaches, methods. So when we just moved away from the your analysis on Hua Guofang and that area.
Yeah. Now, what I started to talk about context. Was that heard? Okay.
No, not yet.
So the leadership was really concerned that they not be seen as de-Maoizing the place. You know, this whole notion that, let's get rid of Mao as quickly as possible, and if you don't, you're a bad guy and all this. You're dealing with a country that has been, for decades, a population, imbued in Mao's theories, imbued in Mao's persona as the great helmsman, and you deathly fear that there will be elements in society and elements even in the international sphere who will see you as getting away from the great leader. Now, what's the way around this? The way around this is by by both changing policies, slowly, gradually, but trying to hold high the flag of Mao the whole time. Now that can, as time goes on, the flag can be held a little bit lower, but it was very much a consideration. Early on, this involved criticizing Deng, which is, of course, one of the great sins of Hua Guofeng. Well, guess who? Guess who said in this very early period, we have to continue P Deng for this period. And he knew nothing about how he's going to get screwed. Chen Yun. Deng would screw him. It was just an understanding of this. So this kind of sensitivity to Demaoization was a driving factor, context for what the leadership was doing. And of course, it created problems because many aspects of the party wanted to do more demaoing quicker. Now it's also quite interesting that Deng himself was one of the leaders most concerned with the threat to Mao's reputation. His main concern after the reversals of verdicts at the work conference was that this not go too far and damage Mao's prestige. And he even told Jimmy Carter in the White House, we're not demaoizing. We're doing whatever he wanted us to do. Of course, the specific reference was foreign policy, and that wasn't quite totally honest anyway. But there was this thing which was part of Deng. Now you can say why or whatever, but if we're going to talk about two whatevers, I'm going to read you another quote. Now, Hua had sort of three different versions, if you want, of the two whatevers, all of which were fairly flaccid, really. Now, in September 1979, this is well after the third plenum, Deng writes on a document, all policies formulated by Chairman Mao were correct. Our mistakes came from not insisting on Chairman Mao's line. Deng Xiaoping. It's genuine. We've seen the document. So that's that context, and context will differ. Contexts are very different in the post-Tiananmen period. Okay. A second, let's see, finding my particular pieces of paper here. A second consideration is specifying the nature of conflict. There's too much of a tendency, I think, in the literature to jump from conflict is the stuff of politics, but to suddenly assign it to particular factions. Was there a little gang of four? We can talk about that. I don't think so. Also, issues that can be issues really among lower levels are suddenly seen as struggles, power struggles at the top. Now, a case in point of this concerns the Criterion of Truth debate. This really was an academic dispute, and those involved didn't expect anything to come from it. It emerged in part because of some, personal conflict between people of different opinions about that, which then got spread throughout wider in the community. It developed because of an interest of certain people in the military to push it, I think, in large part because of personal suffering. There's a link between Criterion of Truth and people being screwed in the Cultural Revolution. So, Lo Rei-ching is a big actor in this. Now, Deng certainly was truth from facts, but he was not somebody jumping out there in front of it. And to the extent he did get involved on a, if you want, a struggle basis with other leaders, it was not Hua, it was Wang Dongxing. And this is a consistent view of the best party historians on the basis of the kind of information they have. Moreover, there's a question of, well, how closely was this linked to any particular policy dispute? Well, not very much. If you want to look at the, once provinces started signing up to say, oh, we support the Criterion of Truth, well, one of the earliest was Heilongjiang, which on the policy of agriculture, they were certainly the most collectivist part of the equation, because that suited their conditions in Heilongjiang. And who lagged? Who lagged? Well, Zhao Ziyang. The greatest lagger was Wan Li. And Wan Li, we know from his biographer, who was quite close to him and whom we interviewed, that Wan Li's attitude is, oh, this is nonsense. This is biaotai. This is just deference, just showing that you agreed to something. Just do your work. Work's important, not this bullshit. So it's a lot different from all sorts of levels of conflict get mixed in there, but it's not the kind of gigantic thing which is often seen. Now, party culture. I'll try to leave some time for other people than me just talking. The most significant thing of this period, which can't be replicated in the, or at least not for very long, in the post-Tiananmen period, is the immense respect for old revolutionaries. There are many ways in which this, many examples I could give, but let me just refer to, go back to a statement by Hu Yaobang at this sixth plenum. Now he's just been made chairman, okay? So what does he say? This is a speech to the, I consider our party is lucky that some old revolutionaries from the founding period are still alive, and moreover, function as the mainstay of the party's leading core. This is not to say that we want these elderly comrades to deal with concrete issues, but it is my responsibility to explain that two things have not changed. One is that the function of the old revolutionaries has not changed. Second, that my lesser standard has not changed. Comrade Deng Xiaoping is the principal decision maker of the Chinese party. With the center's leading core in place, political life is very normal, and collective leadership is truly restored. Well, deference to the old guys, but much more than that. If you fast forward from this nice restoring collective leadership, we have Zhao Ziyang's statement that we, myself, Hu Yaobang, we're just mere big secretaries to Deng Zhengyun. And Bo himself, sorry, not Bo himself, Deng himself, this party has to have a popo, a mother-in-law who has to be obeyed, and I'm it. This is various ramifications for institutionalization that we could perhaps talk about later. And finally, I'll just mention, and perhaps it can lead to some discussion, is stability and unity is a very basic part of party culture. Even Mao talked about it, even if he ripped it up, particularly during the Cultural Revolution. Deng, I think, really believed in it, even if he conducted a coup against Hua and dismissed Hu and Zhao, and on good authority we have, was considering dismissing Jiang Zemin. So, but I think it did become a consensus, a deeply felt aspect of party culture. This is what we want. We don't want all the time. But now, and this kind of worked with Jiang Zemin. Not perfect institutionalization, Hu Jintao, and then they made a big mistake. I don't think they knew what mistake they were making, but they made it. So now we have something which is ironically not really stability and unity, but that ideal in a way is in part a support of Xi Jinping, because you don't kick out the leader and have stability and unity. So maybe I'll stop there and let you, Andy, and whatever audience questions there are, and we'll leave it at that. And I guess I now click these mute buttons and stop video.
Well, keep the video. I'll because it'll whoever's talking will automatically appear. So thank you very, very much. I mean, this is it's going to take me a long time to absorb just all the implications of what you've laid out, and I really I'm in an unenviable position of kind of asking follow-up questions in real time. But let me ask one or two before I open it up to our audience. So I guess the first question I have kind of links your current work with the kind of the larger questions of this series, and I'm not sure it's even the right question, but let me ask it, and we can see how. And that is either can you or how can you kind of link this this reinterpretation or corrective to party history that you're working on to your sources and approaches? I think you spoke about approaches in terms of contextualizing kind of along these, these dimensions that people tend not to think about or tend not to take as seriously in more contemporary attempts at elite politics. It's more a question of who rose through the ranks when and how, and let's see kind of what the aggregation of these personalities are. But there's there's almost a tendency to try to reinterpret some of these core contextual norms that you just laid out. So how are you? Is there, besides your own interpretation of these events, can you link? Beyond that, can you link something special about the actual sources and the methods by which you've mined this this material to that corrective?
I'm not exactly sure I'm getting the drift of your question, Andy, but
I can restate it very, very quickly, and that's basically that what you're giving us a story that's very different from from what we've what we've learned to accept and see as kind of what happened. And I'm wondering how much of this different interpretation, how much of it is due to kind of your own interpretation, and how much of it might be due to the actual source material that you have been able to collect that maybe others have not?
Yeah, I think, well, this is actually a question which I have thought about, even if I didn't get it. You can put it this way: if I criticize others for only looking for what they know, what are we looking for, Warren and myself? And if you want to put it this way, if you look at the the period we're dealing with, 70s, end of 76 through 81, I think we pretty much had from the beginning a sense, or knew, that the line about Hua just didn't make sense. But we didn't know a lot of stuff about actually how capable Hua was, what he had actually achieved, and this came out of the sources. It came out of specific knowledge. Like, if you want to talk about economic reform, for example, he was deeply into that. When you had the so-called State Council theory conference, which was the July to September or October 78, which was all about the economy, Hua kept turning up. He was listening to these people, trying to, of course, this was early stage, this was limited sort of ideas, but vastly beyond what the system had done. So he was there, ingesting this, and it was affecting his views. Now, another example, which I think is really quite telling, is there was so much, that had to be done to restore order after the cultural revolution, and to get rid of disruption and so forth, but meant reforming, changing leadership in specific places. Now, in Beijing, that wasn't particularly difficult. The central government, where it was pretty much kept under control after the initial stuff back in the late 60s. And the radicals, in any case, had been more confined to a few of these cultural ministries and so forth. But in the provinces, it was a quite different thing. And Hua had to go through a process of changing leadership in, well, I should be able to remember how many, but let's say 5 or 6, which was a very, very important process, and one which also had to be handled with sensitivity. You don't just go in and kick everyone out. You got to have the government running, the party running. So it was a very sensitive thing, and you had to inject yourself into, and I had no idea when we started out on this project, into important, very serious disruptions, particularly in Inner Mongolia, which was just a terrible mess. And it was Hua who went in there and oversaw that. So we're learning about this guy. We're learning about this guy. We're also in the process learning about the limits of what can be done by either Hua or Deng. And actually, if you look at the personnel changes, there's not that much change from, say, the period up to the end of 78. And then if you want to, however you want to talk about the 79 period when Deng is growing, and then kicks Hua out. And the personnel, looking at provincial personnel, the problems and changes then, the types of people who are being appointed. There's a great deal of similarity. But there's also cases where neither guy could really get a handle on the situation, which was in Hebei province, where there was extreme factionalism that lasted well into 1980 because of the history of those particular things then. So yes, we started with, and again, because of all the missing pieces in this mosaic, you have to, it is an analysis which is inherently limited. So, I can talk about, well, this is the chapter I've just finished and asked you to read. About foreign policy.
I'm working on it.
Foreign policy. So talk about US-China normalization. Now, Deng, in a sense, has to get the major credit. In a sense, Hua said, you do this. And also the Americans came along and thought, oh, Deng, to coin a phrase. But if you look at that process, and a lot of it is just interesting the way politics works. Both the US and China danced around the whole question of arms sales to Taiwan. The whole process. The US, Carter from the beginning said, well, tell them. But, as a past, whether it was Vance or Brzezinski, they really danced around it. The Chinese never said, you can't have arms sales. Never. The goals of normalization and the reasons for them were so powerful. And besides, Mao had said, oh, there are the three conditions. There was never a fourth condition about arms sales. No, I'm serious. And the US quite early said, okay, three conditions, we'll do it. The Chinese were very slow to pick it up. There's a famous, maybe not so famous, but I think very revealing memo from Mike Oxenberg saying, I was looking, could see why trying to figure out what they are doing is why they are sort of so slow in coming to the farm we're willing to give them, if you want. And he said, because they have some super intelligent strategy, or they're just not so smart at all. And he said, the more I looked at it, the more the latter appeared to be the case. Okay, I have a lot of, Mike was my Tongshui at Columbia, and I have a lot of regard for him. And so that was good, but the feeling that they had to support Deng to get normalization because of this assumed split in the leadership on this policy is not quite right. It wasn't maybe entirely wrong, because I think Deng's contribution to normalization was not persuading the others in the leadership to do it, or not coming up with some genius formula to make it possible, but I think to calm sentiments in the elite, high elite, but lower down, about doing this, particularly with regard to Taiwan, and sort of, using his prestige as well as position in the standing committee to facilitate this. And these guys, by the way, these well, what I'm generically referring to as these guys, some of them, and by the middle of 1979, there was a lot of dissent. There wasn't dissent. They weren't going to kick Deng out, for sure. They weren't going to actually change Deng's overall projection of what policy should be, even though they were increasingly disagreeing with it. But they were raising these questions about the utility, why have we we've gone too much to the US? Why not? What about let's mend things with the Soviet Union and so forth. This whole thing of you just going overboard with the Americans. Anyway, I hope that answers the question.
No, there's a really there's a great truth there that I don't want to take up time teasing out. That's really helpful. What I want to do is, if I can, I want to ask maybe take several questions from our from our audience and ask them all together, and maybe you can kind of weave them together in your response, if that works for you.
Okay.
So let me just ask them, and then please just take them in whichever order you'd like. The first one, and I'm going to be paraphrasing here a little bit. Somebody asks about the 1990. The question doesn't ask about the early 1990s. Doesn't place it at a particular time, but the intrigues between Chen Yun and Deng Xiaoping. To how far into up to the into the past the 80s and into the 90s does your work look at that, and is there is there a new way in which we might think about that?
Mm-hmm.
The second question is more of an it's more of an it's a more technical question, which is, please share some tips on how to interview Chinese officials, particularly on rather sensitive topics, such as personnel and elite politics. And what kind of questions should I ask that basically doesn't scare my potential sources away? And then the third question is, I know that you don't, that you haven't been paying as close attention to the Xi Jinping era, and this is more of a speculative question, so of course you can answer it any way you want, but I think it's a great question. That much of what you've written has been about essentially correcting how things have been interpreted in the past. This person asks, when you think of what people are saying about Xi Jinping's China, do you ever think to yourself, I wonder how much of this will get debunked by future scholars? Do you see the same mistakes happening over and over again in terms of analysis? I think it's a great question that I will now mute myself and ask you to respond.
So I now click mute button. I mute you.
No, I'm muted. Just go ahead. We can hear you. Oh, now we can't hear you.
I'm not very good at clicking buttons, but anyway. Well, just now the Chen Yun and Deng intrigues. Let me put it this way. Well, first of all, there's the huge difference in characters, and I mean characters. There was I'm probably not going to recount it accurately, but Mao had a comment about both of them, and it was something like if a feather floated down from the heavens, Chen Yun would see it as a brick. And whatever the corresponding way for Deng was just the opposite, you know, all sorts of crap could flow down and he just wouldn't, you know, he would just bear up. And I think that's true. That's a basic characterological difference. Now, they also, Chen Yun, he had his experience in both organization and the economy. And I think particularly for this post-Mao period, it's the economic thing. And of course it was, now Chen Yun going back to 56, 57 was all for modifying the Soviet system, but strongly, you know, well, you can call it the birdcage business. He did not want to give that up. Now, Deng is, you know, like Mao before him, said at various stages, I don't know anything about the economy. Well, true, Xiaoping. But initially he was, you know, he sort of ceded influence to Chen Yun. He knew he wanted to go fast. He didn't know how to do it, and he would basically, in those early years, let the Chen Yun, and when Zhao Ziyang came in, who was very much in the Chen Yun mode in that initial period, let them do it. And this was the sharp readjustment of in 1980, particularly at the end of 1980, when they were scaring themselves to death about inflation, overheating, and so forth. The same sort of thing, which of course happens in 1988, where Zhao Ziyang is in a different place. But anyway, that's a longer story, and I would recommend people look at Chris Reardon's new book on the Third Way, which I think certainly on the policy side has many important indications of what was going on. But the thing was, and we go back here to this business of, you know, the reverence for revolutionary heroes, whatever you want to call them. And who were the two highest remaining living? Deng, Chen Yun. They were both on the standing committee under Mao. That's a huge credential. I mean, you know, Deng, in fact, both Deng and Chen had it both ways, because Mao shat on them at different points in time, but they also had the status which came from Mao. So the elite generally could see both and honor both. Anyway, so they are there. Deng with the first Southern trip in 1984, I think, or would probably be more involved in other things in that period, but that was clearly a case of where he's basically deciding to take a course which Chen Yun wouldn't agree with on, you know, the opening, opening to the 14 cities and so forth. He makes certain concessions to Chen Yun about Shanghai and so forth. But he's basically moved on from being, caught in Chen Yun's birdcage. Now, at the same time, he's exerting personal authority over Chen Yun. Personal authority. Among the other things Zhao Ziyang said, Chen Yun would complain, I want to have a standing committee meeting. But Deng was, don't want to have one. So there's no standing committee meeting. Or Chen Yun's old Soviet colleague from the early 1950s was setting up the first 5-year plan. Arkhipov comes to China, and Chen Yun wants to really buddy it up, which he does to a certain extent. But he's told he has to read a statement reinforcing the conditions Deng has set for improvement in relations with the Soviet Union. He has a little piece of paper. People were there in the room, and he gets it out, but he's clearly unhappy. His fault for overheating the economy, because he decided he would play with the economy. And of course, he didn't know what he was doing. And the solution was to go back to the kind of tightening of the situation, which led to another readjustment, which was, needed, but against sort of Deng's inclinations, his underlying inclinations, but something he accepted as necessary. You have your finger up, so.
Yeah, sorry about that. I'm getting signals from our colleagues in IT that we've got about 5 more. That we've got the 5-minute warning. I want to spend a moment to be able to just wrap up and thank you and everybody who put this together. But would you be able to just give a quick like a speed dating answer to one?
Well, the question about how would you interview officials? Well, first of all, 2 things there. Officials is one thing, not former secretaries trying to correct the historical or party historians. And I would think you'll probably find Wolf Warrior officials, but maybe not. I can't actually help there. It is the Xi Jinping era, after all. Now, I expect, well, hopefully, if under a future leadership party history comes back, there may be bases for including a reevaluation of not just Xi Jinping, whether it was good or bad, but what the hell actually happened. And I just would, actually, if I can, I had jotted down a few things that I thought that we don't know about, I would call the whole post-Tiananmen period, which would be worth knowing, and perhaps if
Please, yeah, I think we do have, we should have time for that, yeah.
First of all, the question of institutionalization had been raised both in other contexts, and I've mentioned it. There was never institutionalization in the Chinese Communist, never. I think I may have said Deng would have kind of liked a bit, particularly after him when he was not around to be Popo anymore. But Jiang Zemin, he was He wanted to stay on, okay, head of the military commission, but in that period, it was just, and this has to do with the difference of status. I mean, often you see, oh, well, there are always old guys who supposedly have such authority. And I sometimes think that whatever happens, if so-and-so, if Bo Xilai had been selected, I think people, oh, that was Jiang Zemin's in. So Xi Jinping is like, oh, that was Jiang Zemin. We don't really know. We don't really know that process of selection. We don't know that process of selection. We know that there was, in 2007, which was essentially when Xi Jinping got chosen, because then he became, on the standing committee, the second person in the secretariat and so forth. Of course, he could have still blotted his copybook, but he was essentially chosen. That there was this broader consultation within the party, which was later junk, but we have no idea how that worked. We also have no idea how does one campaign for office? In the Mao era, you didn't campaign. I mean, you might have, obviously you wanted to stay on the good side of the chairman, but how do you waited for, to be, you might have taken a certain line, or you might, that you thought would appeal to the chairman. And with Deng, how do you, how did you make yourself, or, well, that's complicated because there, he apparently was quite favorable to Wang Li, who never got onto the standing committee. And as Deng said to him, I had no idea how disliked you were among other top party leaders. But what that says is, and I think this is true with Deng, he was willing to let a system, at least for not maybe the leader, but those in, say, the standing committee have its own dynamic. But you change. I'll just stop here. But you change when there's no longer, Hu Jintao had been selected by Deng, for God's sake.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
No one had selected after Hu Jintao. So it's a different process. How did that work? What did Xi Jinping do to get himself into a position that he could be selected? He hung around Shanghai with Jiang Zemin, or what? Or I'm told that the actual person who was most influential in pushing him was Wen Jiabao. Who knows? But it was, what's the process? We don't know. We should try to find out these things. Whether we can or not, I think is a very, well, certainly not now. Maybe long after me, maybe after you.
Long after, yeah, certainly long after me. Well, I could talk all night. And I wish I had scheduled this for 3 or 4 hours as opposed to an hour and a half. So I just, I hope that we can continue this conversation because there's a lot, there's a lot to unpack. I want to thank you so much for taking the time out and joining us and really just sharing so much valuable information, not only about kind of how to rethink it was settled law in the past, but also how to really re-engage and think about ways, the kinds of questions we need to look at that we're not looking at, and reminding us of some of the methods that still might be available to us. What I'd like to do is just, because I didn't do this at the beginning, I want to thank Gabrielle Rayner, Hosta Coleman, Ellie Rostum, Sean Lynette, and Amanda Nepomuceno, who were all instrumental in putting all of this together for tonight. Fred, do you have any closing remarks?
Oh, well, this is perhaps a cheap shot, but there's so much nonsense out there which comes to be accepted. Now, what is the one that sort of strikes me is the eight elders, the eight. What's the terminology? The eight
immortals, the immortals.
Yeah, the immortals, the eight immortals. Where did that come from? Where did that come from? Is there a party document? It seems to have come from Hong Kong journalists. And then actually, if you look at different points of time, there are different 8 people in it. Of course, some of them die, so you fill them up with more to have 8. So that's flippant, but I'm pretty exhausted. So
I was going to say that may be flippant, but I think there's a real truth there. I mean, that we really do have to interrogate kind of what we know and what we think we know, and ask, how did we get that? You know, where did that knowledge come from?
That's what I said about, you know, Warren drilling down.
Yeah,
it's not just drilling. It's having questions in your mind, what's not known, and what possibly might shed light that can facilitate knowledge.
I can't think of a better way to end. Fred, thank you so much. We will be in touch because I owe you comments on a chapter, and I will have other questions and follow up as well. I just want to. Unfortunately, we don't have an audience. You can't see the audience and you can't hear them clap, but you know, virtually, it is deafening. And I couldn't be more grateful and delighted to have had the opportunity to share this this hour and a half with you. And we'll be in touch soon.
It's been a pleasure for me. You tapped on my underlying character, which is get me talking about party history, and you can't control me.
I wouldn't want to. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you, Andy.
Take care. Have a good day your time, and we'll talk soon.
Okay.
And thanks everybody for joining us.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.